everyone dismissed as a backwater, decide he's going to conquer the entire known world. It's this incredible story of triumph, tragedy, and just unbelievable ambition that didn't start on some grand battlefield, but with an idea: to walk to the very edge of the map. This is the story of Alexander of Macedon.
I mean, this one quote, his supposed reply to the Persian king, it tells you everything you need to know. It was never about sharing power. It wasn't about carving out a piece of the world for himself. For Alexander, it was all or nothing. So, how did a prince from a place nobody really cared about even start to think on this kind of epic scale?
Well, to really get Alexander, you have to get the world that made him. You're talking about a planet dominated by the massive Persian Empire, a completely fractured Greece, and, oh yeah, the brilliant and ruthless father who built the very weapon Alexander would use to smash it all.
Okay, so let's picture the world around 356 BCE. You've got one single superpower, the colossal Persian Empire. It stretched all the way from Libya to the borders of India. It was huge. And then, way over in its shadow, you have Greece. Yeah, the cradle of philosophy and democracy, but really, it was just a messy collection of city-states. Athens, Sparta, Thebes, they were constantly at each other's throats. They were so busy fighting each other, they never saw the real storm brewing just to the north, in a land they kind of looked down on as semi-barbaric, Macedonia.
Now, Alexander's father, Philip II, he created a weapon that would change warfare forever, the Macedonian phalanx. And the key to the whole thing was the sarissa. I want you to imagine a spear that's not 6 feet long, but almost 20 feet long. The front ranks would lower theirs, and the ranks behind would layer theirs on top, creating this moving, unstoppable fortress of razor-sharp points. It was an absolute game changer.
And into this world of military revolution, Alexander is born. His upbringing was, well, a perfect storm. His tutor was Aristotle, literally the greatest mind of the age. He was completely obsessed with Homer's Iliad, even slept with a copy of it, and he wanted to be Achilles, the hero who chose a short, glorious life over a long, boring one. And this wasn't just some classroom theory. When he was just 16, his dad was away, so he crushed a rebellion, burned a city to the ground, and then founded a new one and named it after himself. At 16.
Then, suddenly, his father is assassinated. Alexander is just 20 years old, and the empire Philip built starts to crumble. Rebellions pop up everywhere. All his rivals see a boy on the throne and think, easy pickings. Oh, they were so wrong. In just 2 years, Alexander showed the world the lightning speed that would define his entire career. He crushed the northern tribes, marched on the city of Thebes, and razed it, sold 30,000 people into slavery. The message was loud and clear, and the road to Asia was now wide open.
So, in 334 BCE, Alexander crosses into Asia with his army. And this whole thing was just an unbelievable gamble, a campaign of pure audacity that kicked off with a symbolic gesture and a legendary puzzle. In the city of Gordium, he shone the famous Gordian knot. There was this ancient prophecy that said whoever could untie this incredibly complex knot would become the ruler of all Asia. It was supposed to be a test of intellect, of patience. But you know what? Alexander didn't really have time for either.
He just looked at it, drew his sword, and sliced the knot right in half. And you got to get this. This wasn't just him being impatient. It was a statement. This was a guy who didn't play by the old rules. He made new ones. And that one act became the symbol for his entire approach to conquest. Audacious, direct, and brutally effective.
You really see the two sides of Alexander at the Battle of Issus. He's facing this massive Persian army, led by King Darius III himself. Alexander leads this ferocious cavalry charge straight at Darius. Darius panics and flees, leaving behind his army, his treasure, and his entire family. Now, Alexander could have been unbelievably brutal here. But instead, he treats Darius' his captured mother, his wife, his children, with the absolute highest honor. It was this gesture of chivalry that just stunned the ancient world.
So, with the Persian king on the run, the original Greek mission, getting revenge, was technically over. But Alexander's ambition, it had ballooned into something so much bigger. He wasn't just a Greek general punishing Persia anymore. He was becoming the new king of Asia. His next stop was Egypt. And the Egyptians, they were tired of Persian rule, so they welcomed him as a liberator. They crowned him pharaoh. But even more important, the priests at the oracle of Siwa declared him the son of the god Amun. And this was a huge turning point. It basically cemented in his own mind that he wasn't just a king, he was on a divine mission. And you can see that divine confidence on full display at Gaugamela, the final showdown with Darius. Alexander was totally outnumbered, but he used this brilliant, high-risk tactic. He intentionally moved his army at an angle, baiting the Persian cavalry to attack his flank. This created a tiny, temporary gap in the Persian line, and that was all he needed. He immediately wheeled his elite cavalry into that gap and charged. Once again, straight for Darius. And once again, the King of Kings fled, and the greatest empire on earth just shattered.
But now, as the undisputed ruler of the world, Alexander started to change. He began to adopt Persian clothes, their court rituals, and he brought Persian nobles into his inner circle. His vision was a new, blended culture. But for his Macedonian veterans, these proud warriors who saw the Persians as conquered enemies, this felt like a total betrayal. This was the start of a really deep crack forming between the king and his army.
And all that tension just exploded into tragedy. At a feast, a guy named Cletus the Black, the man who had literally saved Alexander's life in his very first battle, got drunk and started shouting what a lot of the army was feeling, accusing Alexander of forgetting where he came from. In a blind rage, Alexander grabbed a spear and killed his old friend. He was consumed by grief for days, but the damage was done. It showed this terrifying divide growing between the king and his men.
The war for Persia was over, but Alexander's thirst for conquest was definitely not. His eyes turned east, towards the mysterious, legendary land of India. He wanted to reach the great ocean that he believed marked the end of the world. But it was here that he would finally face his greatest challenges and his ultimate limit.
At the Battle of the Hydaspes River, he went up against the army of the Indian king Porus, and for the very first time, the Macedonians saw a terrifying new weapon of war: 200 armored war elephants. These were the tanks of the ancient world. But somehow, through just sheer tactical genius and the discipline of his veterans, Alexander won a brutal, bloody victory.
He'd won the battle, but he was losing the war for the loyalty of his men. After 12 years of non-stop marching and fighting, exhausted by monsoon rains, terrified by rumors of even bigger armies waiting for them, his army finally had enough. At the Hyphasis River, they just stopped. They refused to go one step further.
For the very first time, the undefeated conqueror, the man whose will had literally reshaped the world, was forced to turn back. He wasn't stopped by an enemy army. He was stopped by his own exhausted soldiers. He had finally reached the absolute limit of what his men would endure, and with it, the end of his dream.
And so we get to the final dramatic act. Alexander's return journey through a deadly desert cost him thousands of men. He finally made it back to Babylon, the new capital of his empire, already planning new campaigns. But fate had other ideas.
In June of 323 BCE, after a sudden, raging fever, Alexander the Great died. Just like that. He was only 32 years old. And on his deathbed, when his generals asked him who his massive empire should go to, his last word was basically a prophecy of pure chaos: to the strongest.
And that is exactly what happened. His empire, which had been held together by his will alone, immediately fell apart. His top generals, they called themselves the successors, turned on each other, plunging the world into 50 years of brutal civil war. His wife, Roxana, and their young son were murdered. The unity that he had forged in blood didn't even outlive him.
But here's the crazy thing. While his political empire just vanished, his cultural empire lasted. His conquests had shattered all the old boundaries, and they created a new blended world, the Hellenistic Age. Koine Greek became the international language. Cities he founded, like Alexandria in Egypt, became these incredible centers of science and learning. For centuries, this mix of Greek and Eastern culture would define civilization.
So we're left with this question, right? Who was this guy? Was he a visionary genius who was trying to unite humanity? Or was he a megalomaniac, a tyrant whose ambition cost millions of lives? He showed us what a single human will is capable of, but also the terrible price of that kind of greatness. His life is still one of history's biggest, most fascinating, and most troubling questions.